Chaudhri joins us, President Tax. He represents Deloitte India. Uh, Good morning. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to first start with where do we stand in terms of the tax regime? You and me, and perhaps everybody who's watching the show, they have just one cry: bring the taxes down.
So I think if you were to look at the basket of taxes, the first and foremost change that has happened in India is the fact that today the largest single collection that the government has is from GST. That is followed by personal income tax and finally from corporate taxes. So therefore, the reliance of the national exchequer on corporate taxes has ebbed, and there is a greater reliance on the GST, which was a key reform that the government brought in 2017, and that reform has paid off. The question now is that having stabilized the GST revenues, is the government going to be ready to embark on the next set of tax reforms, which is going to be dealing with personal taxes and corporate taxes? Because I can fully appreciate that no finance secretary or no finance minister would like to carry out reforms on both the direct and indirect taxes simultaneously, because that could be a risk to the exchequer. But having stabilized indirect taxes now, having seen the success of the reforms on indirect taxes, I think the time has come to try and do the simplification and rationalization on the direct taxes side.
Uh, what, to your mind, for the economy like India, where you have a strong middle class and a very minuscule taxpayers who are in the bracket of 39% plus, should be perhaps the long-term average in terms of where the tax rate should move? I'm asking you out of syllabus questions because this is something I've been thinking through. Okay, why tax rates are high? Should they be high? I mean, what is the incentive for somebody to work hard? Because if you work hard, you make more taxes. The smile tells me
Well,
that we both are feeling the same pain.
well, I think there are two or three things that the government can do. One, the government embarked on a simplified tax regime for individuals. I think it's a great move, and the proof of the pudding is in eating it. Today, three-fourths of the Indians who file their corporate personal tax returns do it under the simplified regime. I think the government can be a little more generous in increasing the slab rates and making sure that the starting base on which personal taxes are paid goes higher than what it is now. Also, the government could well introduce a higher rate for standard deduction for salaried employees. I think the buoyancy in taxes, which the government has been experiencing from personal taxes over the last few years, is telling us very clearly that the momentum on compliance is increasing. And because the compliance is increasing, the government can be generous enough to increase the slab rates, increase the standard deduction. I think that's the first thing to start with. Insofar as the larger community is concerned, because there is a community of taxpayers beyond the salary taxpayers, but they're still forming a part of the individual taxpayer base. I think where businesses, small businesses are concerned, increase the level of coverage for presumptive tax. So therefore, the compliance burden goes down. For example, we do have presumptive taxation for a number of professional services groups. I think there the limits, the caps, which I think between 1 and 2 crores, could actually go up higher to, let's say, 4, 5, or 6 crores. So I think if the government was to try and carry out these moves, it will carry out simplification, create greater predictability and certainty, and of course, increase the compliance of in society.
I like to bring something which, in a sense, is important, but it is also crucial, which is that what incentives can be provided for MNCs to promote R&D and innovation in India?
I think one of the things which India has been blessed with is its talent pool. And if we look at it, the success that we've had in our software industry, the success we've had in our IT industry, and now we are seeing the growing success in our global in-house centers. India is becoming the hub of global in-house centers, and these centers are today not just shared services organizations, They actually have the potential to become the R&D hubs, the innovation hubs for the world. And I think one of the ways the government could deal with this is to try and incentivize the GIC establishment and the scaling of the GICs in India. And what could be done is simply by providing greater predictability, greater certainty to them. Today, one of the aspects which bothers the multinationals is transfer pricing. Is India going to be looking at a transfer price for innovation and R&D? And therefore, is India going to be able to give a safe harbor for these activities at a modest rate so that just like what we experience with the software development parks, the way we experience the success of the export oriented units, the same success we experience in our GICs, which then become the R&D hubs for these multinationals. And they're not small. 1,600 GICs today operate in India, and we are only touching the tip of the iceberg. Imagine if we actually realize the full potential of GICs, which is going up from, let's say, 60 billion today to, let's say, 120 billion of exports, and some of it is then related to R&D, and some of it is related to innovation. I think that's where the ecosystem will get created.
Uh, One puzzle which needs to be perhaps demystified is that our direct taxes, can they really act as a indicator of what the government compulsions are? India has always been a taxed starved economy, but last couple of years both direct and indirect taxes have been above what the government has been budgeting. So if the idea was to perhaps maximize revenue, now that things are back on the track, is it time to start thinking differently? If you start liberalizing the tax rates, if you start making tax reforms and compliance easier, it will act as a booster, both sentimental and actual.
So I think if we look at taxes, India has gone through some of the most profound changes that it needed to do foundationally in taxes. First, Mr. Jaitley, when he was the finance minister, started the process of saying, why don't we start ebbing the corporate tax rate and taking away the tax holidays? That journey started in 2015, and by 2020, we had done with that journey. India's corporate tax rate started coming down, and the tax holidays also saw a sunset. So I think that part was well executed. The second was, as I mentioned, the indirect tax reform. How do you create a single market by creating a goods and services tax that's nationwide? I think that piece also has got done. I think today what the ask is, how do we make a compliance more seamless? How do we make a compliance more efficient? How do we make a compliance more simpler? And when we actually talk to the cohort of small and medium-sized enterprises, they are still telling us that they would love to be able to have more efficiency, greater efficiency in managing their taxes. And one of the things could be, do we really need to have such a wide spanning withholding tax regime in this country? The reason is because there are millions, if not billions, of transactions that happen every day which trigger withholding taxes. These taxes have to be then administered by the payer who has to then do the withholding. He has to then determine what's the right rate. He has to go and deposit this with the government. Then he has to do a reconciliation and so forth. The reason why withholding taxes was such an important part of our system 20 years ago or 10 years ago was because this was also the way we could track transactions and make sure that we had information and insights on the transactions at the governmental level. Today, with GST and GSTN being there, the need for us to actually use the withholding taxes as a measure to track transaction is no longer valid. So therefore, all and any transaction, imagine, which is subject to a GST is no longer subject to withholding taxes, could be a great way of simplification and unlocking the burden on SMEs. So I think the government could embark on some of these measures and make sure that the velocity of transactions goes up in this country, the certainty is greater, the level of compliance burden comes down, and of course, the economy prospers further.
As a student of finance, I distinctly remember that when I was starting my career, there was a time when the Indian IT services were given a very huge advantage in terms of the tax regime.
Yeah.
Because India wanted to promote the service industry, and that, in a sense, was getting a lot of dollars for us. Now the service sector has become big. I'm asking a long question just to establish this point for our viewers. Now the tilt is towards manufacturing because you want to increase manufacturing as percentage of GDP, and that also takes care of a lot of unemployment. So do you think something out of box needs to be done, especially for manufacturing, which is that if you're doing something in manufacturing, apart from just getting PLI schemes, serious tax incentives should be given because that in a sense acts as a catalyst?
You know, India certainly needs to have a strong emphasis on manufacturing. I think the government's program for Atmanirbhar is an important one, especially when supply chains around the world are getting reconfigured. And I think India has a role to play. This also addresses the employment issue, which is a critical issue. It will also help in dealing with the consumption issue because we will have a flow of wealth and money and income and earnings happening to a cohort of people who are going to be better skilled to be in the manufacturing side. So there's no doubt that manufacturing is a critical part of our growth journey. There's no denying the fact that we are a low income economy who's aspiring to become a mid income economy, and low income to mid income requires you to basically focus yourself on building infrastructure, road, ports, etc., and emphasizing on manufacturing. I think the piece which the government has doing well has been the piece on the PLI, the production linked incentive. The government's program there has been success. The question is, what's the next bold move that the government wants to take? Now, the next bold move could well be how government incentivizes, whether it uses taxes or it uses any other lever to actually create another 100 industrial parks in this country. Because if it's able to create another 100 industrial parks in this country where land, environmental clearances, electricity, water, all the various ingredients that go into the creation of manufacturing and running manufacturing efficiently can be done, I think that's the next move that could be very helpful. I think the government's doing a great job of creating connectivity in this country with the roads, with the ports, but I think having massive, gigantic industrial parks may well be the next big, bold move the government may have to take.
Just to wrap it up with one final point, there is data and there is evidence, and I'm talking about constructively, that the Indian tax compliance have become better, the tax brackets have increased, and the ease of paying taxes is something which is one of the large factors which has contributed to India's total direct tax collections. So better compliance and technologies helped us. What else could be done? I mean, what do you think is the low-hanging fruit if plucked? It could just add, it could just add to the tax buoyancy.
You know, at this point of time when Nikunj, you and I are speaking, nearly 1 year of tax collections of the government of India are stuck in tax disputes. I think while at the front end we can carry out certain reforms, we can bring in technology, we can bring in efficiency. I think one of the critical areas for India to address is dispute resolution, dispute settlement. Disputes will happen. They are a natural part of the process. But the issue is how do you A, mitigate those disputes from happening, and B, when they happen, how do you have swift dispute resolution? We cannot have tax disputes, for example, going into hundreds of thousands, going back into 10, 15 years. We can't have a situation where even the first level of a tax resolution takes 3 to 5 years. I think as a country, we will be doing well if we are able to move towards a more efficient dispute resolution process. And that I think is the need of the hour because taxpayers not only want to be compliant, but they also want to make sure that if there is a dispute, there is a resolution mechanism which is efficient, fair, and trustworthy.
Well, I really appreciate your time. We started with what could be done, what has been done, and what should be done. Great connecting with you, and certainly look forward to much more of you going forward.
See you, Nikhil. Thank you.
If you like this video, then like, share and subscribe to ET Now.